So if you've got a Bible, turn to that passage that was read for us by our brother, Genesis 45. I would love to tell you a funny story. I will tell you a funny story to get us into it, okay? About why I'm preaching this text. A friend of mine preached it, and we got into a bit of a youth group that my boys go to in his church. We got into a bit of a habit. He'll mention something and we'll talk about it, whether it's something that he's preaching on, and he'll ask for my thoughts and engagement, and we'll talk about it. And on this particular day, he said that, or I thought he said he was going to preach on this verse, on verse 28. I think your translation says, "I am convinced Joseph is alive. I will go and see him before I die." My translation says, "It is enough. Joseph is alive. I will go and see him before I die." And so he went off and did the youth group thing, and I just sat there and thought, okay, I'll get my thoughts together, probably feeling a little bit proud that he'd asked for my input. And so I sketched somewhat of an outline of my thoughts over the course of about an hour. And the Lord really moved me. And I was really excited at the end. We were saying goodbye to him, and I said, let's meet up, let's talk. I've got some really good stuff the Lord's just allowed me to see. And he said, I preached it last weekend. I was like, okay. So maybe the last hour wasn't for him. Maybe the Lord wanted me to do it. And I was lined up to come and preach here. And so I thought I'd stick with it, and we'd go through this passage. I'm convinced that you will all know the story of Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, and how he was sold into slavery by his brothers, worked his way up by God's grace, became the second in command to Pharaoh, and he was the man who saved not just Egypt from the famine, but actually all the surrounding nations as well. And I'm just going to focus really on verse 28. I'll read it from my version. I prefer mine because it's a little bit more literal. I think it's a little bit more helpful. So verse 28, Jacob, also known as Israel, says, "It is enough. Joseph is still alive. Joseph, my son, is still alive. I will go and see him before I die." I wonder how you use that word enough. I wonder, do you use the word enough? I'll give you two examples of how I use it. You're at a nice meal, you've been sat with some friends, and the host turns to the guests and says, "Have you had enough? Would you like some more?" And the reply comes normally just out of politeness, because you do want more because it was lovely, but you just feel too polite. And so the reply comes, "Oh no, I'm fine, thank you. I've had enough." Another slightly more negative way that I use it, when my 5 children are fighting, and I shout from the 3rd floor down to the 1st floor, "That's enough!" Straight off the bat, I want to try and encourage you that Jesus is enough. I thought about how to frame tonight. Do I frame it by saying, "Is Jesus enough?" Do I frame it by saying, "Jesus enough"? But I think I want to come in a spirit of gentleness and just tell you, Jesus is enough. I think all of us at different points in our life, even different points during the day, certainly different points during your week, unfortunately, Jesus is not enough for us. Actually, what we like, even as Christians, sometimes even as mature Christians, what we like is Jesus plus something is enough for me. So here's some examples from my life. Different points in the last 38 years. Jesus plus, please Lord, some financial security, that will be enough. Jesus plus, I'd really like it if the Lord took this bad back away and this bad knee that I've got. then that would be enough. Or, perhaps a more holy ambition, but still wrong, Jesus plus a happy, healthy, thriving church, and that will be enough. Jesus plus this situation that I'm facing being resolved, and that will be enough. But you know what? Jesus hasn't created us to be satisfied in anything except himself. Some of you do need to ask that question today in the negative sense, and you do need to ask yourself, is Jesus enough for me today? He may have been enough for you in the past, but is he enough for you today? Some of you maybe I'm trying to be polite, okay? Joyce is going, no, shush, don't say it. But some of you are more, well, I was going to say closer in age to Jacob, okay? And the question is Jesus going to be enough for you as you travel towards the river, the final river that comes? Church leaders, is Jesus enough for you? You know, when Paul talks about his thorn in the flesh, my friend Steve showed me this. And he talks about his thorn in the flesh that was given him to prevent him from being conceited. Do you remember what God's response to him was? My grace is sufficient. And that word sufficient means enough. My grace is enough for you. Not too much, not too little, but enough. And I think as we go through verse 28 tonight and we look at Jacob, the main point that we have to get is that Jesus is enough. You know, what I've wanted and longed for over the last 16 years since I've lived in Swansea is a thriving, growing church. Not just for myself, but for the city. And in God's grace, he's not done it. At least not with me, with us. We got close once, and then it all went away. And that's just an insight into my heart. See, sometimes even the good things that we want, we still want Jesus and them things, even if they're good desires. And actually the question has to be, yeah, but what if Jesus doesn't do those things? Is he still enough for you? And that's why I asked the question, particularly of church leaders. Is Jesus enough for you as a church leader? I hope that I think I have matured, and I think I've got to the point where I can say, like Habakkuk, though the fig tree does not bud and there's no fruit on the vine, though the olive crop will fail and the fields produce no food, though the sheep are cut off from the fold and no cattle are in the store, yet I will still exalt him. I will rejoice in the God of my salvation. And that's where we want to get to. Whether that's where you are today or not, that is where we want to get to. You see, Christ wasn't enough for Demas, was he? He fell in love with the world. Christ wasn't enough for the rich young ruler. He went away sad because he had great wealth. Christ wasn't enough for the farmer who built bigger and bigger barns until his life was cut from under his knees. Christ wasn't enough for the prodigal son. I'm not talking about the one who went away. I'm on about the one who stayed at home. You remember what he says to his father? He said, all these years I've served you and you've never given me even so much as a goat to share and celebrate with my friends. And do you remember what the father said? He said, my son, you were always with me. And everything I have is yours. But it wasn't enough for him because he stayed outside. This idea of Christ being enough. My introduction is like a little bit long. My first point is really long, so we'll have to hack that down as we go through it. Okay, the last 2 points are short if we get there. But as we talk about this word enough before we move on to the first point in the text, what we're really talking about is the all-sufficiency of Jesus. And I want to tell you, he is sufficient for you. In your weakness, in your poverty, in your sickness, in your loneliness, he is sufficient. Paul says, at my first defense, no one stood with me, but the Lord stood with me. He was sufficient for me, even though you all left. He's sufficient when we don't know what the future holds. His love is sufficient. His mercy is sufficient. His grace, as we've read, is sufficient. His justice is and will be sufficient. His peace is sufficient. His power is sufficient. His wisdom is sufficient. Even the foolishness of God is wiser than the wisdom of man. His providence is sufficient. His sufficiency is sufficient. His glory is sufficient. This is something that always captures my imagination. Did you know that when you've been in heaven 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, did you know that his glory will still dazzle you? You'll never get to the point where you think, I'm kind of bored of this now. I've seen all there is to see. No, his glory will be sufficient to wow you, to delight you for eternity. So his sufficiency is not just something that is like just enough. It will forever be enough. Is he enough for you? Jesus said, I am the bread of life. Whoever believes in me, you won't hunger. You want to walk with me? You won't walk in darkness. You'll walk with me and I will be your light. You won't thirst. You won't die. Tied up in all these things, this idea of enough, this idea of sufficiency, I think is the disposition of contentment. If Christ is enough for me, then whatever happens, I can be content because I have him. I think this is the disposition that God is working in those of you who believe. By his Spirit, in the heart of every true believer, his aim is to get me to this point. I gave you some negatives of who Jesus wasn't enough for. Let me give you some positives. Jesus is enough for the saints. Do you know what Paul tells the church in Thessalonica? Or Thessalonica, wherever you're from. He says, when Christ, who is your life, appears, then you will appear with him in glory. Like Paul literally just holds up the church in Thessalonica and says, guys, I know that Jesus is all you have. I know that Jesus is, that's what you're all about. When Christ, who is your life, church. And they're like, thanks, Paul. You encouraged us that day. It was enough for the church in Thessalonica. This was Paul's disposition. You go to the book of Philippians, but he says, I want to depart and be with Christ because that's far better. Christ in his weakness, Christ in his strength. I consider all things rubbish compared to the surpassing greatness of knowing or having Christ. So he's enough for the church in Thessalonica. It's enough. Christ is enough for Paul. But the question is tonight, is he enough for you? One of our brothers over here, I had my eyes closed, I didn't see who it was, but one of them prayed that we would have a new vision of Jesus, like the old hymn, a view we've not seen here before, beholding in glory so wondrous, with beauty we had to adore. And he quoted that hymn. But you know what, if we're honest, sometimes there's a long time since we've seen the face of Jesus. And he's not been enough for us. Not out of his insufficiency, because he doesn't have any, but normally because we have wandered away and we've tried to find our enough somewhere else. Philip says to Jesus, John 16, show us the Father, and that will be sufficient. My translation, That will be enough. Show us the Father. That will be enough for us, Jesus. And Jesus' response comes back. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Philip, you've had enough. And I pray that tonight that's what you will see is a vision of Jesus, that he is enough. One last point before we move on. Jesus is enough for the saints. He's enough for Paul. He's enough for the church in Thessalonica. But I want to tell you as well that Jesus is enough for the Father. And this is crucial. Have a think about this for a moment. Do you know that Jesus is enough for the Father? Jesus is the apple of the Father's eye. The Son is the Father's eternal delight and satisfaction. Where does the Father eternally get his joy and his laughter and his celebration and his praise? Where does the Father get it all from? Well, the Bible will tell us it's from the Son. He says, doesn't he, at Jesus' baptism, at the transfiguration, "This is my Son with whom I am well pleased." Actually, on one occasion he says, "This is my Son whom I love." The Father loves the Son so much. The Word tells us that he has given all things into the hand of the Son. And the Lord said to my Lord, "Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet." The Father's delight is so much in the Son, he says, "Come and sit on my right," the highest place of honor. But the question tonight, is he enough for you? I was trying to frame it positively. I've failed. Jesus is enough for you. Okay, let's get into it. Goodness me. Right. Why is Jesus enough? From verse 28. Firstly, Jesus is enough because the proclamation of Jesus is greater than the proclamation of Joseph. I know it's late. I know you've already had 3 points this morning probably from our brother Phil. But try and get your head around these ones. Jesus is enough because the proclamation of Jesus is greater, it is better than the proclamation of Joseph. What happens here? Well, Jacob's heart, we're told, it revives. How does it revive? At the proclamation that the Son is alive. This is why his spirit has revived. He hears the word of Joseph. Let me explain to you a little bit more. If you've got your Bible open, go to verse 17. And you'll see that it's Joseph really that's speaking, even though Joseph is absent at this point. And in verse 17, I'll read from verse 16. "When the report was heard in Pharaoh's house, Joseph's brothers have come. It pleased Pharaoh and his servants. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, 'Say to your brothers,'" forgive me if I don't know what your translation says, but an instruction comes from Pharaoh to Joseph, "Say this, proclaim this to your brothers." Look down at verse 19. You'll see something very similar. "And you, Joseph," says Pharaoh, verse 19, "and you, Joseph, are commanded to say, 'Do this, take wagons from the land of Egypt for your little ones, your wives, bring your father and come.' But the Pharaoh says to Joseph, 'You are commanded. Say this.'" You're commanded to say. Not convinced? Let's do another one. Verse 26. "The brothers come. They stand before their father. And they told him, 'Joseph is still alive, and he is ruler over all the land of Egypt.'" What's happening in that verse? Well, the brothers are coming and they are telling their father. They're proclaiming the good news about Joseph to their father. One more. Verse 27. when they told him all the words of Joseph. There is a proclamation here of good news. We know what the good news is. I'm going to get into it in a minute. But the good news is that Joseph is alive. But it comes through this message from Pharaoh, through Joseph, to the brothers, to Jacob. That's going to be important if we get there. We might not get there, but if we do, that's going to be important. The power to revive Jacob comes from the word of the Son proclaimed by the brothers. This bit the Lord gave me yesterday as I was pondering. Okay, I was thinking about this and I was thinking, okay, if this is what revives him, then what condition was his heart in before this moment? And actually, Genesis tells us. I've got loads, but I'm going to cut them down. I'll just give you one or two. Firstly, if you've got your Bible open, you can go to chapter 37. That great moment when Joseph's wonderful coat was presented to the father, covered in goat's blood, and he presumed him dead. And this is what Jacob says at that moment in chapter 37, verse 35. All his sons and daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning." And Jacob wept for him. So that's the state of his heart in chapter 37. Skip on a little bit past this point in the story. I'll show you one at the end and then I'll show you one at the middle. At the end, Jacob's having this conversation with Pharaoh. Imagine that, in Egypt, when he finally arrives and he gets there. And Pharaoh's asking him about his life and, what he's been up to all these years. And this is what Jacob says to Pharaoh, considering his own life. Chapter 47, verse 9. Jacob said to Pharaoh, "The days of the years of my sojournings are 130 years. And then he gives a summation of his life, which I think is no doubt coloured by the most recent activity in his life, because that's the way we work as human beings. And then he says, "Few and evil have been the days, the years of my life." This is the disposition of Jacob's heart prior to his heart being revived. I'll give you one more. Chapter 42, verse 36. There's also one in 43. There's also one in 44. But I'll give you one in Genesis 42. This is when the brothers have been to Egypt. They've got some food. They've gone back and they've discovered that they've got loads of food. Joseph's given them. They don't know it's Joseph. And they've also got all their money still in their sack and they're panicking about what's gone on. But in chapter 42, they're talking about taking Benjamin back to see Joseph, that they don't know is Joseph. And Jacob, their father, said to them, to the brothers, this is amazing, "You, brothers, have bereaved me of my children." I think Jacob knows that they killed Joseph. That's for another discussion. "Joseph is no more. Simeon is no more. And now you would take Benjamin? All of this has come against me." And then in verse 38 he says, "My son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he's the only one left. If harm should happen to him on the journey that you are to make, you would bring down my grey hairs with sorrow to Sheol." Why am I talking about all this? Do you know how long has passed from chapter 37 to 42 and 43 and 44 and 45? 22 years. And this is what I think the Lord shared with me yesterday. 22 years has passed, and his soul hasn't changed. And that's not a criticism. I'm just telling you this is the condition of the man at the end of his life. Sad. Jacob is in, by his own words, an evil place of perpetual sorrow. The thought of losing Benjamin would be enough to tip him over the edge. It's been a grief-stricken couple of decades. We have a broken man, a broken-hearted man, who cannot bear even one more drop of suffering. He can't take it anymore. This isn't a man who is living. This is a man who is dead, but his heart still reluctantly beats. And yet in verse 28 we're told, it's enough. Joseph is alive. We're told that in verse 27 that his heart is revived. Why? Because he hears the proclaimed word of the Son. I wonder how many of you feel like Jacob today for various different reasons. Maybe you feel like the Apostle Paul, that you've suffered sorrow upon sorrow. And your heart is broken. Decades even of feeling less than yourself, less than what God made you to be. Suffering perhaps disappointment, chronic pain. Maybe it's your own battle with perpetual sin, loss, grief, a failed career, a fractured church has battered you. How can your soul be revived today? Well, you must realize that the greater Joseph lives. He's alive. Joseph is alive. Jesus is alive. And the word of Jesus, like the word of Joseph, must come to you in reviving power. Side point for you. And this is something else that the Lord just amazed me with in these verses. This proclamation of the risen Son. It's a hard hitter, this one. It comes from the brothers who tried to murder him. And I was thinking about that. I was thinking about how God used these sinful, broken, guilty men to proclaim truth. And I couldn't but help think, that's what preachers do. We deliver the message of the Father from the Son by His Spirit, but we are broken people who are responsible for the death of Christ. And I think there's some really interesting application there. One is that preachers handle this amazing message, and they better make sure they don't get in the way of delivering that message. But secondly, particularly for churches who've gone through difficult things, at the moment, you're going to get all kinds of preachers up in your pulpit. Some of them you will like. Some of them you won't like. Some of them you will have biases towards in a good way. Some of you will have biases towards them in a negative way. But when they proclaim the truth, you have to put all that to one side. Whether you like them or not. Whether you agree with them on all their theology or not. You have to, because the Lord is speaking. It's the word of the Son that is coming to you, if it is true. And you better not prejudice yourself against even wicked brothers if they are delivering truth. God, I'm flipping out. I don't even know where to go from here. Just give me a minute. What we're going to do is we're not going to deal with the other 2 points in the text, okay? We're going to stay in this one, and then we'll finish somewhat early. Just as the word of Joseph through these deceitful brothers was enough for Jacob and enough to revive his heart, I want to tell you that it's the words of Jesus that will revive you, wherever you find yourself today. wherever you find yourself this week, wherever you find yourself this year, both individually and collectively as a church, individually and as a family unit, the word of Jesus is enough. It was enough for the Samaritan woman. How do I know? She left a water jar and she went and told people. It was enough for the centurion. Remember him? Heal my servant. The Lord says, I'm coming. Get the kettle on. And he says, I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof. But just say the word, and my servant will be made well. See, the word of Jesus was enough for the Samaritan woman. It was enough for the servant, the centurion. The word was enough. After God spoke, the word was enough for Job, who meets him in his sorrow. And he says, though you slay me, bring an end to my life, yet I will hope in you. This is the good news that we all need to hear today, whether we're Christians or whether you're not a Christian. What's the good news for us? Well, we've already said it a couple of times tonight, but the good news for us is that Jesus is alive. Do you know what? It's good news that God came near and didn't stand far away. It's good news for us that Jesus suffered in this evil world. It is good news for us that Jesus died an unjust death, that he was unjustly punished. That's good news for us. That he was hung on a cross for our sin, that is good news for us. It's good news for us that he died, that he actually died, and that he was buried in a tomb. But all that doesn't matter if he's dead. Doesn't matter, does it? How much of our time as believers do we focus on the cross of Christ? And then we give a small amount of time to his resurrection around Easter time. But actually, this is why our hearts can be revived. Because his heart was revived. The Lord did not allow his Holy One's body to see decay. He was raised to life. And this is the life that can revive your soul today. Your Jesus lives for you. He's raised to life. Jacob's heart, this is a really interesting point. I am going to finish, okay, because we just can't go through it all. You'll just have to invite me back, okay? Jacob doesn't believe them. I missed a little bit out. When they first delivered this message, the ESV says that Jacob's heart was numb, and he did not believe them. Reminds me a bit of Thomas. The ladies go and they tell the disciples, and Thomas doesn't believe. This is the same disposition, I think. It's the same thing I think is happening in Jacob's heart that happened back in chapter 37. Because we're told that the brothers and sisters, following the disappearance of Joseph, the apparent death of Joseph, we're told that Jacob refused to be comforted. So he refused to be comforted in his death, or apparent death, but now he refuses to believe when he's alive. So I don't want to beat on Jacob too much, because I can't imagine how hard those 22 years were. But I think there's something here that we can learn from. I've met people like this. Professing Christians who find little or no joy in the gospel. Maybe it's Christians who relentlessly struggle with doubt and assurance. Why? Because they won't believe the words of the Son. I've been there before in my Christian life. And the solution was, believe the words of the Son. Believe what he said. Stand on his promise. Repeat it to yourself. And even if you think it's entirely unlikely, Jesus said it, I believe it. Jacob was struggling with this. Sometimes God sends dirty birds to feed us. Like Elijah in 1 Kings 17, the ravens come and they are commanded to feed Elijah. And Elijah could have said, no, I'm not doing that. That's a dirty bird. But instead he embraced what God had sovereignly planned. And it sustained him. The word of God, the promises of God, is what will sustain you. The word from Christ himself. I'm going to wrap things up. But I want you to know this evening that the word of Jesus, the proclaimed word of Jesus, is better than the proclaimed word of Joseph. This is what is going to revive your soul to make sure that you can journey over the river until you meet the Son face to face. You see, Jesus doesn't just revive the heart. Oh, Jesus will give you a new one. In fact, when you hear the word of God and it is preached accurately and truthfully, even though imperfectly, your heart will burn within you. No matter how long you've had a broken heart, no matter what sorrows life has dished out, Jesus can restore the years that the locust has eaten. See, the word of God, we know that it's living and active. One word from the Lord is enough to sustain you for a month. Like Elijah, we can go in the strength of that food for 40 days. Like Jonathan, who ate the honey and his eyes brightened. The word of the Lord, Psalm 19, is perfect. And it's the word of the Lord that will revive your soul. Not rest and relaxation, although that's nice. Not a weekend in the Marriott with a spa and some nice treatment. That's nice. But only the word of the Lord will get you over the Jordan. He's alive. The good news from the King comes through the Son, via the brothers, into the soul of Jacob. Where did Joseph's words come from? Pharaoh. Where did Jesus' words come from? The Father. Do you remember what Jesus said in John 12? I have not spoken of my own authority, but the Father who sent me, has he himself given me a commandment, what to say and what to speak.